Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, Jesse Collings, joined as always with Jason Ounpraseuth. Jason, how are you doing today on this lovely Friday in New England?
Yeah, doing well. Of course, New England weather is always just random and just sometimes it's really humid like yesterday, and sometimes it's really cool like today. But just still doing well. We've been on a decent run of sort of official, unofficial part twos of podcasts. Last week, we just continue our NXT discussion. Now we're just picking back up of our past discussions of CM Punk and Bryan Danielson back when we didn't know they were signed with AEW, had talks with AEW, but now it's a reality. And so that's really exciting to see just that in the flesh. You hear about all these rumors and all that stuff, but to actually see it is just a whole another story.
It really, it really can't be better than it is right now. And I think that's why everyone everyone is so excited, because if I know you went back and listened to our podcast from a few months ago when we were talking about CM Punk and Daniel Bryan and what could potentially happen if they were to go to AEW. And really, like, you couldn't fantasy book. I mean, you couldn't dream it any better. Is that basically the two guys I think most the people wanted to see the most in AEW are in AEW now. And that really doesn't happen that much in pro wrestling. It really doesn't happen where you're so sad, the fan base is so satisfied, because as wrestling fans, when we talked about this in the past, we get so excited about certain things. We fantasy book things in our head. We take a little rumor and we run a million miles with it. You can go back to when Paul White teased that they had signed a big a star, and everyone was like immediately like, "Oh my God, it's CM Punk, it's CM Punk," and then it ended up being Christian, and everyone was kind of like, "Oh, Christian, okay, we wanted CM Punk." We're just wrestling fans are so excitable, and they're so optimistic, despite what some people think about the fan base. And it really is rare that you see something like just come to fruition the way that pretty much everyone wanted to, which was seeing Punk and Bryan and Adam Cole popping up in AEW. Like that was why, the takeaway from All Out was almost like, it really doesn't get better than this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was listening back to our Daniel Bryan podcast, and we were just sort of fantasy booking Double or Nothing of when if he would show up there. Turns out we were a pay-per-view, too early on that. Would be the next one after Double or Nothing that Bryan Danielson would show up. And yeah, we were just kind of expressing hope that he would show up in AEW and not be sort of, I guess, complacent, for lack of a better word, and just go back to WWE and just do these old, feuds with just the old people, doing all these free matches that we see now in WWE. And yeah, we're just expressing hope that, hey, do something different and go to AEW, feud of Kenny Omega, and just do exciting things. And that's actually happening. You're right. We rarely see those things come to fruition. And, the possibilities are endless. People on the internet going crazy about CM Punk and Hook having this dream feud that no one would even imagine, 12 months ago.
Yeah, and there was a lot of frustration with Daniel Bryan. I was frustrated by him. I was frustrated when he'd go on these shows and he'd talk about how he wants to wrestle at Arena Mexico, and he wants to make wrestling great. He wants to make wrestling better, and he wants to go to New Japan. He wants to do all these things. And yet he was still in WWE. He had re-signed with WWE a few years before. And it wasn't like, if you look at the quality of his work in WWE, it was still really high. He still had very good matches. He wasn't always used to the best of his ability, but he was still a highlight performer in WWE. But just the difference in excitement for him going from WWE to AEW, it is so much greater. And it's not even because, I think that AEW is a better booked promotion than WWE. It's just, he was in WWE for a long time. He had wrestled all of the top names. He had done programs with all of the top names. There wasn't a whole lot left for him to do that would be different. And now it's like, whoa. It's obviously you have your big match like Kenny Omega, which is, I wrote in my review for All Out that was on Wrestling Inc. That is one of the most anticipated matches. That will be one of the most anticipated matches in like modern wrestling history. It's a total dream match in a a time where dream match is a very liberally used term, that is a legit one. And you can start from there and you can go all the way down to the smallest member on the roster. It's an exciting matchup for Daniel Bryan, and the same can be said for CM Punk. I think there's a little bit of difference in what both of those guys can bring to the table and what both of them bring to the table at the moment for AEW. But it is so intriguing having so many different possibilities for these guys, as opposed to if they were to just go back to WWE, or if Adam Cole were to go up to the main roster. It's just there's no optimism there for what we could see, as opposed to the opposite is in the case with what we've seen over the last week in AEW.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to go back to our Punk podcast and just sort of listen to how, we were kind of skeptical of, CM Punk's passion for the industry, though of course at that time we didn't know, like, he was talking to Tony Khan throughout this whole entire time. But yeah, we're kind of just wondering, what does he still have this passion for the business? And yeah, he does. He has admitted in these AEW interviews that yeah, he did lose passion. And then that great promo he cut on Rampage was talking about how he left wrestling in 2005, and then how he sort of he's sort of regained it in the since joining AEW. He's talked about how he wants to wrestle all these young talents. Darby Allin, of course, he's done that. Will Hobbs was someone he mentioned, and that's probably going to happen soon, most likely. And yeah, there's just a lot of, it's just more the breath of fresh air that AEW brings. Of course, WWE brings all the sameness that they have. Of course, doing all these rematches over and over again that many reviewers have complained about. But yeah, AEW brings that freshness. They've done a good job at booking live TV. Not everything. Every week. It's not always the best episode ever. But still, there's always something fresh that AEW brings to their products that it really is brings an optimism to wrestling, more so than I guess the pessimism that WWE can bring out sometimes.
Well, two things from there from what you said. The first regarding Punk, he took a lot of flack on social media with people and people in interviews who just said, this guy's grumpy, this guy hates pro wrestling, he's bitter, he's angry, he's this miserable person that just hates everything about pro wrestling. And that went on for years and years. And now he comes out and on his promo on Dynamite on Wednesday, he's the happiest person in the world. Nobody loves pro wrestling more than CM Punk. He's so excited to be there. He's putting over everything on the card. He's putting over all of the fans. He's putting over all of the talent. He's putting over Tony Khan. And it's like, okay, this guy and he's not faking it. Like he's not BSing people. Like he says, right away, he's like, I'm not going to come out and lie to you. And that's kind of CM Punk's gimmick the entire time, is that he's incredibly honest and he doesn't do a lot of BS wrestling stuff when he's on the mic in the ring. And you can tell he's just really enthusiastic, and you can tell from the media scrums backstage. You can tell from the interviews he's done so far. And it really is I think you have to have a completely different perspective on his personality now than what maybe you had before, because again, there was that trope out there that he was just this bitter old guy who hated what had happened to him and would never be able to rejoin the wrestling world again. The second aspect of what you mentioned about that optimism, I was thinking about this earlier. You and I are both about the same age. We do not remember the Attitude Era. We do not remember the Monday Night Wars. I was very small. I wasn't watching wrestling at the time. And I probably didn't seriously start like watching wrestling as what I would say like as a hardcore fan until about 2010, 2011. That was when I was finally like old enough to kind of go online and read some stuff, as opposed to just kind of being a child that only watched, Raw and SmackDown. But over that time period, since I've been like what I would call a serious pro wrestling fan, there hasn't been an American major wrestling promotion that I have been like, yeah, this stuff's awesome. This stuff is great. I'm so excited for the next episode. WWE has had its highs, but it's had a lot of lows over the last 10 years. And even though I've always liked some stuff on WWE shows, I never really felt super confident in the direction things were going in WWE since I've kind of matured into becoming a hardcore fan. I felt that way about New Japan at times. I felt that way about Ring of Honor at times, but I never felt that way about like a major American wrestling company, one that I was watching the weekly television every week. I never felt that way about Impact. I never felt that way about WWE. So this is a new feeling for people of our generation that kind of grew up with WWE kind of being in a creative decline. And if you talk to older fans, they'll say WWE's been a creative decline for 20 years. In a lot of ways, the business reflects that. But this is a new feeling almost for people like you and I who have been big wrestling fans, but now have this show that's on 2 hours on cable every week that anyone who's a wrestling fan kind of knows that we're super enthusiastic about. It really is. It's new for us, and that is one of the things that I think is important to remember. If you're an older wrestling fan, or if you're younger than us or you're our age, that we're having a different experience with this than maybe some other people, and I couldn't be more excited about it.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. Like Ring of Honor, like they do have like weekly TV, but at the same time, like you're mostly looking forward to the big events for Ring of Honor, whether it's a Best in the World or like when they do New Japan, the Global Wars, or even Final Battle. Same with New Japan, you're really looking forward to the bigger pay-per-view events. Not they don't really have weekly TV, and so you're right. WWE and Impact were really the two companies dominating weekly television, and for the most part they've been pretty subpar compared to what we have now with AEW. Their weekly television, like I said before, is very exciting, it's very vibrant, it feels very fresh, and so yeah, we are experiencing a new kind of experience with weekly television in North America compared to what we had before, where we're mostly looking forward to these big events for companies like Ring of Honor and New Japan.
And even WWE be like, get hyped for Royal Rumble, get
Yeah.
hyped for WrestleMania. But over the years, and we've talked about it, ad nauseum, just you don't have really I haven't had any real confidence in WWE in probably 5 to 6 years. I've liked certain stuff. Like I liked the Shield. I liked when Daniel Bryan was on my TV. I liked when AJ Styles showed up. And I've liked, there's been plenty of matches in a vacuum that I've really enjoyed, and some feuds that I've enjoyed, but I haven't had any confidence that what they're going to do is going to be good, because I know Vince's history and I understand the patterns that we see and what they view their product as. And it's not something that always appeals to me. And the opposite is true with AEW, in the sense that it's so much easier to watch the show when you have confidence and optimism that things will be done in a good way in AEW. And that even if there's a bad segment, you're like, okay, that segment, I didn't like that, but I trust them to figure this out. I trust them to bounce back. I trust them to deliver. And when they tease something that's going to be good, it happens. Or when you get excited about something that's good, it happens. And they've had some misses. The exploding barbed wire match, that could have been a company killer, because that was a really big event. They drew their highest buy rate, or their highest number of pay-per-view guys up until this weekend in history. And that was a total dud. But they got past it. You want to know why? Because they continued to follow it up with good storytelling, with matches that delivered, with promos and programs that elevated talent, that moved storylines along, that created a fresh product. All of the stuff that we like to see in pro wrestling took place on Dynamite and on their shows. And when you have that trust and you have that optimism from the fan base, it makes the show so much easier to watch when you're like, I can't wait to see where this goes, as opposed to when you're watching WWE and you're like, oh my God, this is going to be horrible.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even look at, this past weekend when we're recording this All Out, the anticipation that fans had for Bryan Danielson at the end of the show, like it was obvious that people were anticipating something to happen, but then Adam Cole surprisingly comes out. I think some people may have figured it out, but at the same time, like, we weren't really sure what Adam Cole was going to do with his career, whether he'd be going to the main roster WWE or go to AEW, and he shows up and then it's just all speculation. No one knew what was going to happen. He all of a sudden, super kicks Jungle Boy, joins the Elite, and then you're kind of figuring, okay, there has to be something more. Here you get Bryan Danielson, whole place explodes, and it's just a huge viral moment for AEW. That's that double whammy of a double debut combined with Ruby Soho coming in and building more optimism for that women's division. I think that was a big sticking point in the early couple months for AEW was their women's division was very lacking. It still kind of is in some ways, but still there is that optimism with these new inclusions, like Jamie Hayter debuted recently, becoming the new heater for Britt Baker, and so in the inclusion of new talent and the emerging talent as well. Tay Conti, of course, is one of their emerging stars, and you could see that they're really taking their time with her. Even Thunder Rosa, I think many fans are anticipating that she's going to win the title someday, whether that's the next pay-per-view or in a big TV show or whatever. There's continued optimism for even the lacking parts that were originally there in the beginning.
And the reason you have that optimism bringing up the women's division is because we have seen since they debuted, they have been able to elevate some people in the women's division and turn them into stars. Britt Baker being the best example of that, where the sense where they started, I think it can't be understated how from scratch they were going with the women's division when they first started. It was a lot of people who they brought in who had potential in some way or form, but were very lacking on experience. The only really people with a lot of experience in that women's division were the Joshi talent, who they didn't have for most of their existence because of the pandemic. But over this 2-year cycle, they took Britt Baker and they've made her one of the biggest stars on the entire show. She's, as big of a star. I don't know if she's like as big of a star as Chris Jericho or Kenny Omega or Jon Moxley, but she's basically on that level when it comes to how much TV time they give her, how much she's always in a program. She's always on the show in some capacity. That's they took someone and turned them into a real star. I think you can see people maybe haven't quite hit the Baker level, but people like Thunder Rosa, people like Chris Statlander, people who are on their way up in the company. And again, that helps with the optimism that if they're bringing in, they'll use Jade Cargill as someone that they brought in really from scratch. First match on television was the Shaquille O'Neal match. There's some confidence that even though they haven't given Jade a world title push yet, we have confidence that they can take her and elevate her into a bigger star position, and that one day she might be in the Britt Baker position, or at least in the Thunder Rosa or Chris Statlander position. And that's because we have the track record of AEW that has taught us that it's possible for that to happen. And that again goes back to the optimism that fans will be more patient with things. Fans will be more accepting of a slow burn because the track record has shown that there's a good reason for optimism. The opposite is in WWE, where people get optimistic about something, WWE shits all over it, or Vince drops the ball, or changes a gimmick, or makes someone lose a bunch of matches, and our optimism is gone. And we now feel very pessimistic about the potential of things to get better in WWE. And that is just that, and that solely comes from the track record of the respective companies. I don't think it comes from inherent bias. I don't think it comes from people just wanting to like an alternative. What it really comes from is the track record of what we've seen from both companies. And the only logical conclusion is that it makes sense to invest in AEW's talent because AEW has shown the ability to reward fans' investment. The opposite is true in WWE, where they don't reward your investments.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the Adam Page thing is probably the top, example of this, where, he gets nixed out of All Out for various reasons, but mostly his personal reasons and stuff like that. But still, fans are confident that they'll get around to that Omega Page storyline. Eventually. Maybe I do agree. They're kind of on the thin edge on that a bit, to where okay, maybe you're running patience thin for fans, but still, for the most part, fans are still optimistic that Adam Page will get his moments with the AEW title someday. Whether it's again the next pay-per-view at Full Gear, or maybe even very optimistically, if they can wait that long to the next Revolution pay-per-view. But still, people people are very confident that it's going to happen and it's going to be very good. And even with the new debuts, anytime they get a new debut, Malachi Black, that's someone fans are very optimistic about. Even Andrade, even his even if his debut has been very shaky, I think fans are still optimistic that AEW will be able to turn him around like they did with Miro as well, where he's become one of their biggest stars after that slow build they did with him with Kip Sapien and the whole best friends feud. That was very much a slow build to get him to where he is now.
Yeah, I mean, compare the Malachi Black debuts on WWE main roster TV, and he's locked in a closet asking for challenges for like 3 months, and then that angle goes nowhere, and then he shows up and he's just kind of back. No, I hope people weren't too excited for Malachi Black on the main roster because they did not get it. And then the opposite, he comes to AEW, and what does he do? Like the first time he shows up is he beats up Cody, and then he squashes Cody in a match. Then he beats up Cody's entire family, and he's in like this really hot feud that's going to be a really big deal in a few weeks when they have the Arthur Ashe show. And again, that's a perfect example of that. I wanted to talk about you talked about it earlier, the ending to All Out, and the kind of like how AEW, this whole CM Punk, Adam Cole, and Daniel Bryan, how they've kind of all debuted is very interesting from a presentation standpoint and from a marketing standpoint, in the sense that AEW has tried to lean into rumors online, and maybe they've even leaked stuff to people to get people excited about things. The CM Punk debut at the United Center was a perfect example where they did not advertise that CM Punk was going to be on that show, but they gave you all the breadcrumbs, the booking of the big arena, the some rumors that had been spread online, I think potentially could have been leaked online to certain people, that kind of created this atmosphere of like, oh, I hope CM Punk, CM Punk's coming back. It's going to be on AEW. But because they didn't advertise it and it wasn't confirmed, it left a little sliver of doubt in people's brains that, oh my God, what if CM Punk's not there? What a disaster this would be for AEW. How disappointed that crowd will be. It could be a complete disaster. And all of that builds up to when CM Punk does come out, a greater emotional outpouring from the fan base, and a greater investment, because there was that little bit of doubt, that little gray area that you hit where you're not 100% sure. You might be 90%, you might be 99%, but you're not 100% sure what you're going to see is what you want to see is actually what's going to happen. And that's good storytelling. You keep the audience on the edge of their seat, hoping, waiting, wanting for something to happen, and then you deliver. And that's kind of the key to this, to any form of entertainment, any form of storytelling. But in wrestling, and it hasn't always been like that. And I thought the angle at All Out, the closing angle, I thought it was unbelievable. I was completely blown away by how good it was, because of that same factor. And they played into fans' expectations. They had teased it. Punk had teased the Daniel Bryan thing a few weeks earlier in his original promo. And it just came across as such really good television, because, it's coming at the end of what was already an excellent pay-per-view show. And then Kenny Omega gets the mic at the end of his match. And I know I as a fan, I'm like, okay, here we go. Let's see if Daniel Bryan debuts. And I'm waiting, and Omega's like, nobody can challenge me. And I'm like, okay, here comes Daniel Bryan. And then obviously the lights go out. And I'm like, okay, here comes Daniel Bryan. And then the Adam Cole's music hits. And I'm like, oh my God. It's not Daniel Bryan, it's Adam Cole. And like, I'm kind of actually disappointed, because I want to see Daniel Bryan and I value him higher than Adam Cole. Nothing against Adam Cole, but as a fan, I was like, oh my God, it's Adam Cole. I'm like, oh man, I hope people don't overreact. I hope people don't say AEW swerved them, or that people get really mad, because this has been such a good pay-per-view. I don't want people to just be disappointed that they didn't get Daniel Bryan and instead they got Adam Cole. And I think the fans in Chicago did react to Adam Cole like he was a big star. They didn't boo him. They didn't act like he was this big thing. And I was like, okay, I guess this is it. It's Adam Cole's like the big debut. And then he super kicks Jungle Boy. And then I'm like, okay. And then I'm like, oh, they're gonna do a heel beatdown segment, like, and that's gonna end the show. I'm like, I guess that is a big angle. Adam Cole coming in, like, who can stand up to the elite is gonna be the question for Wednesday. And then of course, Adam Cole starts talking, and I'm like, oh, okay, something else is happening here. And then of course that's when Daniel Bryan comes out. And then at that point, I was just like standing in my living room clapping. I'm like, yes, this is perfect. This is perfect. They could not have done it any better, Jason. It was unbelievable closing angle. It was everything people want about wrestling because they had created that atmosphere of doubt in all of our brains that, oh my God, they're not going to have Daniel Bryan debut. I wonder what's going to happen now. And then it comes out and it just takes what would already be an epic moment and turns it up even further. And it was just exactly why it's worthwhile being a professional wrestling fan. It doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, I mean that's the moments you live for as a wrestling fan. Just those like you said, like the moments that you expect to happen, but when they actually do happen, they still blow away your expectations for what they happened. Because like I mentioned earlier, like we like you said, we knew that guys like Punk and Bryan will be at AEW, but it's really hard to imagine like what would they actually do once they actually be on television or on pay-per-view. You know what would Bryan do in AEW? Oh, he's going to beat down the elite, of course, and interrupt Adam Cole. And even for Punk, I remember watching that Rampage show, and yeah, like there was the part about back of my mind, so where I was like, oh, what if they just swerve the fans? They play Cult of Personality, and someone like MJF comes out and just trolls the fans. Like that would get real good heel heat, but it would get like the wrong kind of heat as well, to where like, oh wow, you're just swerving the fans just to swerve the fans. Like that's really not the kind of heat that you really want from someone. But they didn't do that. I remember everyone chanting CM Punk. I was like, oh, like are they gonna start with the Jungle Boy Jurassic Express tag match and just wait for the very end to debut Punk? But it's like, no, of course you start out Rampage with CM Punk. Like there's no other way to do it, and you just let him talk for however long he wants to talk. And I think that segment ended up being like 20 minutes or something like that for Rampage. And so, yeah, he just talks for 20 minutes, cuts a fantastic promo. And then, yeah, like the Daniel Bryan thing, I was very much in the same vein as you, to where like I was just wondering, like, oh, okay, a heel beatdown segment. That's kind of an interesting way to end the show. It just seemed like the way the show was progressing, it needed like some type of happy ending. Outside of just obviously Christian Cage was not going to win the title, so that's not your happy ending you wanted. But still, you need some type of feel good moment, and not just like, oh, the heels are on top kind of thing. And it was just the perfect way to end it. And there's just no other way to put it. Even for like Ruby Soho, as before, I think everyone already knew, like once she got released and people were charting out her like 90-day release clause, people were like, oh, okay, she can debut at All Out. And they announced like a Casino Battle Royal for the women, and so people were already anticipating like, oh, she's gonna be the Joker, she's gonna be the surprise entrant. And even then, like before her music played, the fans were straight chanting her name. Like everyone knew that she was going to come out, and she still got a big pop. It was a big feel good moment for her as well. And so it was just a fantastic night of just expecting, or everyone knew what was going to happen, but still surpassing those expectations.
Yeah, and with Ruby, I think it really was a different kind of dynamic than for the Punks and the Cole and the Daniel Bryan, in the sense that she's not a big star at that level.
Mm-hmm.
People know who she was because she was on WWE television, but for her to get that big pop, that big reaction, and then get a nice reaction on Dynamite the following Wednesday, I think that's so important for her run in AEW. And that if you were unfamiliar with her, or even if you saw her in WWE, you wouldn't really think that she was like this big, huge superstar, but she gets that big reaction. She gets a subsequent nice reaction on Dynamite. And now you're like, okay, this person is a big star. If you're a viewer at home, you're like, okay, this person is a big star. And I think that's something that AEW has really succeeded in from basically its entire existence. But especially if you look at the people that they debuted, you're like, these people look like they're big stars. If you watch Dynamite this Wednesday, right, Jon Moxley, there's, I don't know if it's timing issues or whatever. They have a very brief main event between Moxley and Suzuki. A lot of people were disappointed by that, and they ended it kind of early. And it might have been because Suzuki had an injury to his eye, or we don't really know why. But they had ended it early, and they kind of had some time to kill on the show. So Moxley just kind of wandered around the crowd and celebrated with them for like 2 or 3 minutes before the 10 o'clock hit, and they went off the air. And yeah, it probably wasn't like how they originally designed it, but I thought was tremendous television because Moxley walking around the Cincinnati arena with these people that all had all sorts of signs that were treating him like he was a god. I was like, this is great for people who do not regularly watch Dynamite or might not be that invested in it, because they are seeing this guy walk through a sea of fans like he is Elvis or the Beatles or Muhammad Ali. He's just so over. These people are dying to touch him. They made all these signs. These children. There's people who are going crazy just being within 20 feet of him. It made him look like a huge star. It made Dynamite look like it was the super hot product, and it made AEW look like this live event that you really wanted to attend because it looked super fun. And that was critical. It was critical at All Out, and it was critical on this Dynamite because these were big moments. You were getting extra eyeballs on your product because of the hype that Punk's first wrestling match had at All Out, and then because of Daniel Bryan debuting at All Out, because of the success of All Out, you had a lot of people watching for the first time. And I thought it was really important to show everyone that our wrestlers are big stars. This is a product that has a ton of energy and it's a ton of fun. You definitely want to come and invest your time in this because it is a worthy form of entertainment for you if you are not already a loyal viewer.
Yeah, I think that's the big part of AEW in general as well, where everything just feels natural. That's just a natural thing for Jon Moxley to do, is just to be with the people and just to interact with them. And they've been marketing that show as a homecoming for Jon Moxley. Of course, he's going to be with his own people of Cincinnati, his hometown, and so that just all makes sense. Just everything he does just feels natural and all that there. And what you said, touching on what you said about how you're sort of marketing these shows for future events, to where, hey, you should come to a Dynamite show. That's a very unique part of pro wrestling in general, to where you kind of get that when you watch like an NBA Finals or a Super Bowl, but at the same time, it's just like you're kind of just there just to be there, or just like if you're just a fan of that sport in general. But for AEW, they create that unique experience of just wanting to be there, and that's why they hype up all these other shows like Rampage and Dark as well, to a certain extent. Like, hey, you should be at everything. You should try to interact with AEW as much as possible, and how you never know when this one person could become a big star, or just grow into other events as well. Look at people from the undercard, like Red Velvet. She was just primarily on Dark for the most part, but then she gets all these big matches, Britt Baker and such there, and she's treated as a big star, being part of sort of Cody's like faction, kind of the Nightmare family, even with in small moments like Paul White. Paul White still felt huge, just giving chops to QT Marshall, just for like a quick like 4-minute match, I think it was, and he like, it felt big to see Paul White in a wrestling match, even though it was just a quick squash match and really just a nothing match for the most part, but it still felt big to see Paul White back in the ring again.
Yeah, and you look at the success of All Out. Look, we don't know the pay-per-view number for All Out yet.
Yes.
Hopefully we'll soon. But as of this recording, we don't know what it is. It has been reported it's the biggest pay-per-view that AEW's ever done. Dave Meltzer said it was the biggest pay-per-view that a non-WWE company has done since 1999. We're probably looking at somewhere between, I would say, 175 to 200,000 buys, which would break their record for pay-per-view buys. But it was a really big show. You have to attribute that to CM Punk wrestling his first match. That's got to be the main draw there. And it was really important that the show was good. And not only was the show really good, like it had good matches, but it just had so much, like I said, so much energy and fun attitude. And I don't think it's a surprise that we saw a very good pay-per-view followed by an episode of AEW Dynamite that did tremendous television numbers, because I think a lot of people who were casual or had never seen AEW before, you watch that pay-per-view and you get everything you'd want out of pro wrestling. Really, you get storylines that really mean something. You've got you've got characters, you've got promos, you've got matches that were outstanding. You had big moments like, obviously Daniel Bryan coming out. You've got the fans singing the entrance theme songs to all these people. It just looks like such a fun, vibrant product that, again, makes people feel like that they want to invest their time in it. And one of the things about all of this, about CM Punk and about Daniel Bryan, is looking at how this really, at the end of the day, impacts AEW's business. And it impacts their bottom line, because ultimately you make these investments in talent and you promote them and you meticulously design their debuts and their first few programs because you want to increase the business side of what you're doing. And there's been some criticisms lately about how effective CM Punk really is as a draw. Is he someone that just pops the hardcore fans, or is he someone that has wider appeal that can actually make a difference to AEW's bottom line? Is CM Punk or Daniel Bryan, are they just popular with the existing AEW fans, or are they really going to bring new fans to the product? Are they really going to make a change in AEW? Are they going to close the gap between AEW and WWE? And I think those are valid questions. And I think in all of the bluster about, oh, how great CM Punk's debut wasn't that a great moment? We can maybe get ahead of ourselves when it comes to saying, well, he's just one guy and he's a big star to a certain segment of fans, but he's not The Rock or Steve Austin, and he's not even John Cena. So he's not really that big of a difference maker. He doesn't move the needle, right? So I have some numbers here. First, I want to talk about Dynamite this week, coming off of the All Out show, coming off of the big Daniel Bryan debut. I'm sure everyone who's listening to this is aware. Dynamite Wednesday night, 1.31 million viewers, second most in company history, only outside the debut. 681,000 of those viewers were in the 18 to 49 key demo, good enough for a 0.53. And perhaps most notably, so AEW Dynamite, 681,000. Raw this week, 678,000. So AEW edges Raw in the key demo for the first time in history. That's an enormous story. I'm sure everyone will be analyzing that as we go forward. The biggest segment will be the Daniel Bryan and the Elite segment that did 1.45 million viewers and 755,000 viewers in the key demo. So clearly that was the big draw for people. And going more broadly, AEW Dynamite is up 19. AEW Dynamite in August was up 19% year over year compared to where it was a year ago. Now, granted, a year ago they were not in front of live audiences, so you'd expect a bump in certain way. In September, small sample size, obviously, Dynamite is up 31% year over year. We'll see how that holds up for the rest of September. So 19. The August number is good because that kind of gives you a whole month, but 19% year over year, right, for Dynamite. SmackDown up 6% in August year over year, and Raw up 8% for both August and September so far, year over year. So Dynamite is growing at a faster rate than SmackDown and Raw have over the past year. So they're not losing fans. They're not turning fans away. They are adding fans. And how long is that sustainable? I'm really interested in finding out. I'm really interested in finding out what the next week's show is going to do. I'm really interested in knowing what the following week's show is going to do, because that will be the show at Arthur Ashe, and that'll be their biggest attendance show in company history up until this point. So I'm really interested in seeing how that plays out. But you can look at the numbers and you can see that this is a company that's growing and they're adding fans. They're not people who are just, pleasing the existing hardcore fans.
Yeah, obviously, there's this pursuit for the mythical casual fan, the quote unquote casual fan that we're always looking at. And, we talked about this before where, it's not really something you should start striving for. It doesn't really exist. People want to watch what they want to watch. And, there's other ways there's the ways you attract quote unquote casual fans is not really going back to the past. It's really just building up your new product and building up new things and giving something fresh and new. And yeah, that's what AEW has done. Of course, like you said before, the whole year over year thing, I think a good influence in that is the fact that there are live attendance, but still, you definitely see the difference in live crowds between a Raw or SmackDown crowd compared to AEW Dynamite crowd, where Dynamite crowds feel a lot hotter than AEW crowds, and so that definitely helps out their business there. And even with television business, it's obvious that. Very curious to see what the TBS move for next year is going to do for the television business. There will be less interruptions because I think October for next month, there's definitely going to be more interruptions for their broadcast moving to Saturday Dynamites for moving for hockey, and so the TBS move is going to be an interesting one. Whether that's going to increase their either their total viewership or their 18 to 49 viewership, and so that's going to be very interesting to see once they actually make the move to TBS.
Yeah, no, I do think that's interesting. So, and like, there's this thing about the pursuit of the casual fan, right? We talked about a lot. Bringing in CM Punk and Daniel Bryan is aimed at the casual fan. Yeah. Because with the exception of John Cena, those are the two biggest wrestling stars of the past 10 years in this country. It's not like, there's no one you could bring in that, especially CM Punk, because he'd been, there's this whole thing of where he had been out of wrestling for so long and he left under such bad circumstances, and there had been all this pent up demand to see him return to wrestling. There's no one you could do better to bring people in that were like casual wrestling fans or, had stopped watching wrestling over the past few years. There's no one better for that role than CM Punk. So this idea that like CM Punk and Daniel Bryan are these hardcore, only appeal to these hardcore indie wrestling fans, and they're not significant enough to make a difference on a company's bottom line. It's really weird. Like, there are stuff on AEW that is definitely aimed at the hardcore fan, right? Yep. Like Lulu Pencil coming down a ringside is definitely aimed at the hardcore fan. And even like Minoru Suzuki and Jon Moxley, that's aimed at more of the hardcore fan. I don't think Suzuki is adding like a bunch of new fans or people who don't really watch AEW regularly to the product. I think he's there for the existing fan base. But Daniel Bryan and CM Punk are the big stars that you would want to bring in to attract fans who maybe weren't watching AEW all the time. So it's really interesting to me what people say about like, they're not going to bring in they're just bringing in the casual fan. I'm like, okay, well, like, unless they're bringing in The Rock or John Cena, like, this is the best the wrestling world has to offer to appeal to casual fans. So if those people exist at all, they're going to be tuning in for CM Punk and Daniel Bryan, and there's nothing better you can do to bring them in outside of something that's completely unrealistic.
Yeah, that's the thing. We're talking about realistically. Like, I remember Brock Lesnar was a free agent, and it's like, should Tony Khan break the bank for Brock Lesnar? It's like, okay, maybe he will attract fans, but that's probably not a worthy investment to pay Brock Lesnar that much money, even though, yeah, he would probably appeal to a bunch of people. But yeah, we're speaking more realistically. And yeah, realistically, Bryan Danielson and CM Punk were the best options to attract, new viewers. And of course, bringing those new viewers so that they can see guys like Kojima and Minoru Suzuki and all these other more things that more appeal to the hardcore fan. And so, yeah, obviously that's what they do. And that's why they brought in a bunch of other guys like that were perceived as just, WWE only guys like Paul White, Mark Henry, of course, bring him onto the Rampage broadcast. These are people that, they have a relative name in casual wrestling circles, mostly WWE fan circles. And, they're not there all the time. They're mostly just, background players and on the broadcast team, and they make good talking heads as well to make things more legitimate, on those Road to segments or just all the hype videos that they put out. They make good talking heads to help build up matches for the newer talents for these big matches.
Yeah, well, I think with people like Paul White and Mark Henry, a big thing is from like a PR perspective, having people who you put those guys on like sports talk radio shows like the week you're in town, like you put them on the sports talk radio shows. Or I know they did the thing like Paul White was at the Brewers game. You bring those guys in, even if they're not really going to be I know Paul White just had a match. If they're not going to be regularly active talent, they're just going to be people. You want to have those people who have an identifiable name with people and have an identifiable name within the sports world to show up and say, look, I'm working for this. You might know WWE. I'm working for this new company. Here's all these awesome things that are happening. Here's what we're doing. Oh, CM Punk, he's going to be there. Like, Daniel Bryan, he's going to be there. We've got this great wrestler, Kenny Omega. We've got all these great young wrestlers. We've got Dr. Britt Baker. She's a dentist and a wrestler. Like, you put Mark Henry and Paul White in those scenarios to advertise your product because people associate them. And they know them, and they have, part of it is that they're both really, visually identifiable. Like, you can see them at airports, like Paul White walking through an airport wearing an AEW polo means something, because a lot of people are going to be like, oh my God, that's Big Show. That's, what's AEW? He's wearing that. Oh, he must be with that new company. Like, all that stuff comes into play, I think, when you're talking about those kind of guys bring in. And again, that's aimed at casual fans. That's aimed at people who might not know that much about AEW, but will be like, oh yeah, I know, that person. And that's why those are good signings. Like, I don't really care what they do on commentary. Like, I don't care if Mark Henry's not that good of a commentator on Rampage, because, his job is to do that. And I know also Mark Henry is also a very good recruiter of talent.
Yep.
I believe he was responsible. He wasn't with the company when Jade Cargill got signed, but I want to say that he was responsible for Jade Cargill, but I might not be right on that. But there's plenty of people in WWE, Bianca Belair being a good example, and Braun Strowman, I think, another one, who were kind of like Mark Henry brought them in because he had connections with the sports world, and he said, oh, and they knew who Mark Henry was because of his fame. But I think that's why you bring those guys in. Moving forward, again, looking at the business side of things, I wanted to touch on like a live attendance, which is one of the easiest things that we're happy that we have it back as analysts, because for a long time without live attendance, it was hard to tell if outside of TV ratings, we really didn't have any info on what was drawing and what wasn't. So AEW in September is in line to have a really, really big September. They're coming off a pretty good run in August where they were above average historically of what their company average was. They had done for tapings, they had done 5,800 people in Chicago, 5,300 people in Milwaukee. They've been getting, they did a really big show. I think they were around 7,000 or more in Charlotte, North Carolina, about a month ago. But looking at September, AEW is going to, I'd have to look at, and there's still some time to go here in September, but AEW on average is probably going to significantly beat WWE when it comes on to average. Now, part of that is that WWE has more shows. They have these house shows that are going to drag down their average, because I think they have a house show in like Charleston, South Carolina this month that has like 2,000 tickets sold. But AEW, they did almost 7,000 in Cincinnati on Wednesday, 6,800. They've got the Newark show coming up next week. That's over 11,000 sold. We've got, of course, the Arthur Ashe Stadium show. That's now over 18,000 tickets being sold. And then you wrap up, and I believe in Rochester, New York. I don't know how many tickets are sold for the Rochester, New York show, but I believe that it's probably going to be around the 6,000 mark or higher. And then you look at, still a few months away, I know the Boston show, the one that we have locally here, they're sold that out a long time ago. And they only have 6,000 seats. To me, that's something where I see that and I say, next time you guys come here, you might have to think about a bigger venue, especially because they sold that out before. I think that was sold out basically before Punk showed up, and now you have Daniel Bryan. And I'll be interested to see if they do start running any larger venues. I know it varies in city to city, but again, we talked about the ratings going up. You can look at live attendance and say, this is going to be a really big month for AEW. They broke their live attendance up until Punk's debut, right? AEW had, I believe, only done one show in history that had drawn more than 10,000 people, which would be the first Dynamite in Washington, D.C. I don't think they do quite 10,000 at the Now Arena in Chicago, where they've had like All Out and stuff. I think that's a little under 10,000. I might be wrong, but it's right about that. But just go with me here. They had one show basically that had done 10,000. Since then, they have the 14,000 at United Center for CM Punk for the Rampage, CM Punk's debut. That's a record for the company. You have the now over 11,000 and counting in Newark, New Jersey. That'll be next Wednesday, or this upcoming Wednesday. People listening to this. You've got the show at Arthur Ashe. That'll be the new company record. Over 18,000 now sold. So that's in that span. You've already basically done 3 shows that were bigger than your previously biggest show. They've got another big show coming up in October. At the new arena in Long Island, New York. The USB arena, I think, or the UBS arena in Long Island. That I know they just did the pre-sale. I think they sold like over 4,000 tickets in the pre-sale. Be interesting to see how much they do. There obviously will be their 3rd show in the New York City market in about a month's time. But again, probably going to be pretty big there. I mean, we're talking pretty big attendance records. They're setting basically attendance records every few weeks now, and that's what happens when you're hot. And again, it just shows that acquiring this talent is already paying off. It's already paying dividends for AEW.
Yeah, you compare that to WWE. Of course, we're recording this tonight. WWE, SmackDown will be in the Madison Square Garden. I just checking out WrestleTix. They've only sold they've sold 10,000 tickets there for tonight's MSG show, and that's really the biggest show that they have. It's typically usually their biggest show, and they sold 10,000 tickets. Of course, like you said, house shows definitely take down their average as well. And so yeah, it's just indicative of a hot product for AEW, where they can run these big venues, and the Arthur Ashe show can definitely lead to more of these unique venues where they can hold these big stadiums and big arenas. If that ends up being a more critical success, because obviously it is a financial success, but depending on how the show goes itself, that could lead to more venues wanting AEW in their town.
Yeah, and AEW also has an interesting kind of advantage over WWE in some ways, where they are going to markets some of these markets they're in the first time, right? This is their first time in the New York City market ever. We'll see their West Coast debut. I think that's going to be a huge deal. Their first show in Los Angeles is going to be a big deal. I'll be interested to see what they do in Seattle, Washington. If they do a big number there, because you obviously have Daniel Bryan, who's obviously very popular in his native state of Washington. They'll probably Tony Khan has talked about wanting to do shows in Craven Cottage in London, which would probably be the attendance, if they were to do it in the way Tony Khan's talked about, will probably be the new attendance record for the show. So they have some advantages over WWE. I've been following WWE's ticket sales pretty closely since they've come back to touring. John Cena made a huge difference in the ticket sales, like literally doubled their ticket sales, like when he was added to the card. Like they would do like 5,000 and then they're doing 10,000. But looking at their September, it's a lot of shows. They do have the SmackDown Tonight, Madison Square Garden, which tickets started off very slow for that show. And they've advertised John Cena for that show. I don't know if he's really going to be there, because he seemed to have walked away from WWE after SummerSlam. And like, is he going to appear on television? Is he maybe do a dark match afterwards? Is he in Europe right now? I have no idea, but Cena's advertised for that. Brock Lesnar has been advertised for that. They brought Becky Lynch back. That's like as big as they're going to do, like load it up. And they did sell, I think they sold like 96% of their tickets so far. But they didn't set up all the seats in Madison Square Garden. They could have easily done about 14,000 seats, and they've only done 10. So that kind of tells you about the demand. But SmackDown and Raw to me seem like they're doing about between 6,000 and 7,000 per show in September. And that's not that big of a difference between what AEW is doing. And AEW is actually going to beat them. The Newark show in New Jersey this Wednesday is going to be bigger than even the SmackDown show in Madison Square Garden. And it's going to be bigger than probably any other Raw or SmackDown. And obviously the Arthur Ashe show, will be bigger than every WWE show this year, except for the 2 nights of WrestleMania and SummerSlam. So I mean, we're talking real seriously big crowds and crowds that rival the size of WWE's crowds.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll check out John Cena's Twitter and see if he tweeted anything. I guess he is in New York. It just did Jimmy Fallon, so he might actually be at Madison Square Garden in person. Again, maybe on whether he's actually on SmackDown or not is a different question. But yeah, that they've tried to market that show hugely. Like you said, they weren't really doing that well, and that's very sad for WWE considering their history. Especially Madison Square Garden is like sort of their mecca for a very long time, and now AEW is coming in and doing very good business in that sort of the New York metro area of kind of place there. And yeah, the possibilities are endless in the West Coast. They could do obviously California, like you said, Washington, even Canada as well. That's so they haven't really gone there at all. And so that's probably going to be waiting for, like, I guess, COVID restrictions or something like that. Maybe they just want to wait to actually sell as many tickets as possible. But Canada is obviously a big market that they can tap into, whether it's Toronto or the Vancouver areas. And so the possibilities are endless in terms of venues and sort of live attendance, as long as things keep going the way they are currently tracking right now.
Yeah, I mean, they're repeating a lot of the same markets that they've were in previously, and I don't know if that has to do with booking availability, familiarity with the booking of arenas. But if you look at like their return to television since, it's they went to Cedar Park, Texas for a second time. They went to Milwaukee for a second time. They've been hammering Chicago a ton, which makes sense because of the size of the market and the success they've had. They're going to Boston twice. They've gone to Miami a couple times. They've gone to Charlotte, North Carolina again. They're kind of going back to the same markets. They're not making, they still have a lot of the country they haven't even debuted in. Real quick, because I wanted to get to this part. This was almost like originally the sole focus of the show, but just kind of talking about, let's talk about Daniel Bryan first. No, let's talk about CM Punk first, actually. So Punk has his first debut match against Darby Allin. I thought he looked good in the match. I thought it was pretty much exactly what you would expect out of the match. Maybe some people thought it would be like a match of the year contender. I didn't really see it like that, but it was, CM Punk came in, he wrestled kind of like a heel style. Darby Allin was from a stylistic standpoint, basically the babyface, where, CM Punk was keeping him grounded, was trying to slow him down, was, and Darby was kind of fighting from underneath. And I thought it was a good match, but now it seems like he's going to start feuding with Team Taz. What do you see like as CM Punk's future in AEW from like a in-ring standpoint, from a storyline standpoint? Where do you think he's headed, and where would you like to see him headed?
Yeah, I think from an in-ring standpoint, I think we're just going to see more of what we saw from the Darby Allin match. Like, I don't think we can. Like, I never had any expectations that he would put on match of the year contenders, and I think that's the expectation we should be going with forward. He'll put on good matches, but I don't think there'll be these barn burner 5-star match type of deals. But still, very solid matches, very good matches. And yeah, I think it was interesting to see him work, a bit of a heel in that match. Obviously the crowd wasn't, the kind of cheering for both guys, but I think it is something to look at maybe in the future, where CM Punk, he gives off the impression, yes, he is a change of attitude where he's a lot more positive now, but I still feel like he is the guy that is sort of in the same vein of Chris Jericho, where he's not a complacent kind of guy. He's a guy that wants to really build a legacy within the business. And I think CM Punk, whether there's a new faction, perhaps, maybe he, after maybe a couple of weeks or maybe a few months of, looking at all the young talent, maybe you'll handpick a few guys, surveys a similar vein of the Shield, perhaps, at least his vision of the Shield, where he would just handpick, a couple of young guys that he would, have behind his back. And so maybe that's a direction could go in moving forward. We are in the honeymoon phase still of CM Punk, where fans just want to cheer him. But I'm very curious whether in a couple months, whether he can execute a heel turn to where he can get people to boo him, perhaps for maybe the same, again, in the same vein as Chris Jericho, where some fans boo him, but also you have other fans that cheer him because he's Chris Jericho. Maybe he could get the same thing with Punk, to where, yeah, he can make be a heel on some storylines, and he gets some fans to boo him through some either nefarious means or just him being associated with a bunch of young heels in a faction.
Yeah, I mean, I think he definitely can pull off a heel turn. I think he could definitely make it work. I wouldn't do it at the moment because it's still
Yeah,
fresh and he's still people still are just going to want to cheer for him. But the thing about AEW is that they have baby faces that the crowd really likes. And so when you have that, if you have a baby face, when you have baby faces that people really like, you can have a heel who will be kind of who can be very popular and can be a legend like Chris Jericho and still get heat and build heat for a program. Like Darby Allin in the match against All Out, like he was a babyface and he was over with the crowd. The crowd popped for his moves, they popped for his entrance, they cheered for him when he made his comeback, even though they obviously love CM Punk. Darby Allin's a great babyface and he's good enough to be able to still get that investment from fans, even if he's working against someone that they absolutely worship. And I think that's a key point. So if you have CM Punk work against some of your hottest baby faces, he totally can pull off a heel promo and he can totally work a heel program. Because, and honestly, CM Punk's at his best, has been at his best in his past when he's this petty, aggrieved, somewhat entitled personality. And that's easily can be spun into a heel program against an up and coming babyface. He could easily work that program with someone like a Hangman Page. Um, so I mean, I would be, if like a year from now, if he's still a babyface, I'd be pretty surprised, to be honest.
yeah, for sure. I mean, again, this Team Taz thing, I think it's just more of like you said, he wanted to work with Will Hobbs. I think it's just more of a
He wants
vehicle
to
to,
work with young guys. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
he said that on a tweet. I know he mentioned, and Taz certainly didn't forget because he brought it up in the promo that he wants to work with Darby. He wants to work with Will Hobbs. He wants to work with Ricky Starks. And I can see that being appealing to him is that he's like, all right, I want to create this next generation of talent. And I'm interested by you mentioning like his original idea for the Shield, which is like he would be kind of the mastermind behind it, and there'd be this three young guys who'd be elevated by being associated with him and being this angle. I wonder if he does pitch that because, and I wonder who would make up that faction, and like what a CM Punk led heel Shield unit or similar to the Shield like unit would be, because I think that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, because I don't really see CM Punk vying for any titles, not even the TNT title. Like, I think he can be big. I think he is big enough to just do his own thing of just do his own feuds, and he's obviously still all you saw on All Out. A match of Darby Allin for no title is still a draw, and so I don't think he'll be vying for any titles. Bryan Danielson, of course, is a different story. He is obviously going for that AEW championship, and that's definitely the right direction for Bryan Danielson. He could be big enough to do his own matches, but I think for someone like Bryan Danielson, who's more of the work rate kind of guy, that's someone that can bring in the match of the year contenders. It's a very smart move to really just push him to the title scene right away.
Yeah, I mean, I think Punk versus Omega for the title is such a gigantic match
Yeah, for
that
sure.
I would be surprised if we didn't get it. Um, Obviously, we're going to be getting Danielson versus Omega for the title. That's obviously going to be a direction. And I think, the difference is Danielson to me, it's not just like, oh, he's like a better worker than Punk, so he can have match of the year contenders. Danielson to me loves the in-ring side of wrestling so much. And he's so excitable about things that he is someone that like in his mind, he's probably like as excited to wrestle Kenny Omega for the title on the main event of a pay-per-view as he is to wrestle like Dante Martin on an episode of AEW Dark. Like, and I see that as what Danielson brings to the table is it's not just being a big star, but the willingness to be able to, and the like just the attitude of wanting to work with so many young guys and wanting to help and wanting to just get out there and wrestle all these different styles. Punk obviously wants to do that stuff too, but Punk is a personality. Punk is a promo first guy. Punk is a guy who is really good storyteller. To me, he's someone that's going to be engaged in more big feuds, and maybe not wrestle like that much. Like he might not wrestle every week, as opposed to Bryan Danielson. I see he'll obviously have big feuds too, but I also see him as just wanting to get in as much work as possible. And they serve different roles. Bryan Danielson to me is a bell to bell every week kind of performer that you rely on to make everyone look good. CM Punk is a special attraction who will be a key matches on every pay-per-view, but maybe won't be wrestling every week. Maybe he won't be on TV every week. I'm sure he'll be around a lot. I'm not going to say he's not going to be like full time, but I do see Danielson as more of that constant presence, and Punk is more of a special attraction.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look at, like MJF, he's not real. There'll be times where he's not on TV for a while, but when he is on TV, he's in a big feud like he was with Chris Jericho. And I don't doubt that like his next feud, whatever he's in, whether they move on from the Inner Circle stuff, well, with the Pinnacle, they'll be focusing more on a big feud for him, wherever that is. And it's gonna be interesting to see, the third guy in all this, Adam Cole, what he's gonna do. He's back with the Elites, and whether they're going to introduce a trios title or not, that's always been a long rumored thing and something that has been teased, but we don't really know there. But for Adam Cole, I don't really know what he can do. There's just a lot of unknown there, especially with him just going back into his roots with the Elite.
Yeah, Cole. Well, I think Cole versus Danielson is a match that they're going to do. Yep. Soon. I could actually see Danielson versus Cole being at the Arthur Ashe show. Cole's different because Cole still has a ceiling to hit that he hasn't hit professionally yet. I think Bryan and Punk have hit a certain ceiling, like as far as like we can expect what peak Bryan Danielson is like and what peak CM Punk is like. Cole, because he had never been on the main roster in WWE and had been in NXT for a while, and before that on the Indies, still has a ceiling to hit. And he's 32 as opposed to those guys who were both in their early 40s. And I think that there's like a lot of long-term story play going in with Cole. I think that he'll be the Elite's like number 2 singles guy.
Yep.
And he'll be almost like a gatekeeper to Omega. And then eventually you could see Cole turning on Omega, and then Cole Omega is a big feud. Obviously trios titles coming or tag titles. There's so much that you can do with Adam Cole because he's young, he's really talented, and he hasn't hit a ceiling yet. And we don't know exactly what that ceiling is going to be. He's been in WWE for a long time where he was over and popular on NXT, but maybe wasn't given the same kind of creative freedom he'll have in AEW. And there's still a lot we don't know about Adam Cole, but he's definitely a good signing for AEW. And I do wonder, he kind of there was some talk about if you're Adam Cole, why would you want to debut now where you're going to be overshadowed by these guys? But I think he's found a good role. And I feel like his first feud is with Bryan Danielson, and it's going to be in the main event at Arthur Ashe. I don't think you're really regretting showing up at the same time as those guys. I actually think it makes it more interesting that he's there too. And, with Punk, with Cole, with Danielson, there's just a bunch of dream matches out there. Punk versus Darby was just one of them. Daniel Bryan versus, any 3 of those guys versus MJF, any 3 of those guys versus Moxley, any 3 of those guys versus Phoenix, any 3 of those guys versus Pac, any 3 of those guys versus John Silver. I don't know. I don't feel any, there's so many possibilities with those guys that any 3 of those guys versus Hangman Page, any 3 of those guys versus Sammy Guevara, all of that is just all open for possibilities. And you can just see this crop of fresh matches, as far as the eye can see. And it helps the company a lot, with their depth, is having more top names that them having matches, regardless of opponent, is going to be a big deal, and can main event a show, can main event a Dynamite, can anchor a quarter hour, can kick off a show, can be, they got more stuff. They've only got 4 pay-per-views a year, but they also have these specials that are going to run starting next year, like the Saturday specials, similar like Clash of the Champions style, and they'll need big matches to anchor those shows. And I'm sure that those 3 guys are going to be heavily involved in them.
And for the top guys, they need breaks sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean that's a big reason why you have these big names. Like Kenny Omega, he can't wrestle every week, obviously, and so yeah, Adam Cole could be there to wrestle for Kenny Omega sometimes. Bryan Danielson, his mindset, he wants to wrestle every week, but it's probably not best for business to have him wrestle every week. He needs to give him a break for at least 1 week or so to keep him fresh for the audience, and that helps build up more anticipation. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. That's a very common phrase. It's a very true phrase because, after someone's been away for a month, they come back and they're still hot. And that's how you keep people fresh. And that's how you keep interest going for your big stars.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that the Chris Jericho MJF match at All Out, where Chris Jericho said he'd retire if he lost, one of the things that made it a little bit more believable to me that he might retire is knowing that CM Punk just came back and knowing that Daniel Bryan was coming in, because
Yeah.
I could see it like Chris Jericho saying, you know what, I don't have to, if he wanted to retire, be like, now's the time, now's the right time, because they don't need me as much anymore because they have these other guys, these other big names, these other legends of pro wrestling coming in and doing that. And you're right, the time off. Daniel Bryan wants to work New Japan, so if once the world opens up, you'll have guys probably doing tours in New Japan. Yeah, it keeps things fresh, and you can see that. Like, you can tell by the way Cody is booked and how he handles himself, that Cody is a big believer in take time off, take a few months off every year and come back and be hot when you come back. And he obviously he's done that this time with his feud with Malachi Black. He did it with his feud with Brody Lee last year. It's just, he's obviously a big fan of that, and I think you can see more of that. And when you have depth at the top of your roster, it allows the flexibility to do that, and it extends the shelf life of everyone as well, because they're not being on TV every week for 5 straight years.
Yeah, I mean, Cody is probably the lead example of that. That's why he's still a big star. That's why, he is sort of a gatekeeper in some type of ways. He was the gatekeeper for Brody Lee to become a big star. He's now the gatekeeper for Malachi Black to ascend it to stardom, to where he'll eventually, he'll probably face Kenny Omega for the title, or even Miro for the TNT title as well. That's the stepping stone for him. And Cody, he can eat these losses, but he'll sometimes get the wins. So, against a QT Marshall. And that'll still keep him strong as well. He is very, smart at that, and he still keep himself busy, of course, with his other shows, the Roads to the Top, which will, of course, that would presumably help AEW's business for at least, a small margin. At least, it's only a net positive, and at worst, a net neutral to do those reality shows.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think Cody came into the company, and like the first thing he did was put an enormous handicap on himself, where he's lost a match where he would never be able to win the challenge for the title ever again. So he understands how to keep himself fresh. He took that, like, he could just be like, actually, I think an 8-month title reign by me would be great, but he understands how to keep himself fresh, and I think that's a big deal, and it's a big deal for AEW, where at the moment, maybe you don't. Now they do. So it's funny. I don't want to say they don't have the same resources as WWE when it comes to acquiring talent, but they almost have more resources because they're less restrictive about who they're going to bring in. And they have the connections with New Japan and Impact and AAA, and have all these options for talent. But especially when you're first starting out, I guess, like, being able to make sure that Kenny Omega and Cody and Moxley and Jericho can be your top guys for years, because you're going to need those guys to establish the foundation of the company, while also bringing along maybe some more long-term people like Hangman Page or MJF or Sammy Guevara or Jungle Boy, people who you still need to develop into big stars.
Yeah, I mean, we're even seeing it with the tag division as well. Well, Phoenix and Penta, they're obviously set to be the next big stars in that division as well, and that only helps Phoenix grow into his own stardom as well. As a single star, but even Penta, you just look at the live reactions. Like, Penta gets like the best live reactions. With everyone just doing the Cerro Miedo chants, and that just consistent sort of things there, that, hey, even if you don't have a title, I mean, obviously they do, but even before then, they're still popular to where fans would even, anticipate them, even if they were mid card guys. And so there's always just things going on within the whole entire card, not just the main event scene.
Oh yeah, and you can definitely see the seeds being planted for stuff. And part of that is just having a really robust tag division.
Yeah.
A, having a robust tag division, and B, having a you definitely don't want to call it a secondary title, but the TNT title being a really big deal helps because it puts people in title programs with maybe not having the responsibility of necessarily having to like anchor a pay-per-view main event, or it adds some realism to the title if people see it as maybe not as important as the world title when it comes to who's holding it. Like, you can have these matches where Dante Martin challenges for the title and it's a little, or Jungle Boy, or it's a little bit more believable that they might win this title as opposed to the world title, which they're very protective of who holds that. Like that only goes to top talent. So it's not for projects, it's for top talent. And you could say the same thing about the TNT title. I mean, but it does add that dynamic where like more stuff is happening on the card than just the 2 or 3 big matches. I mean, they have storylines that have been taking place on Dark, exclusively on Dark. And I think they actually do a good job integrating that, like as far as like if you're watching the Casino Battle Royal this weekend and Diamante and Big Swole are going at it, and they're like, they've been feuding on Dark over the last few weeks. And like, I'm like, okay, so like, that's good, because if you're watching, I'm like, oh man, what are these women? These women really hate each other. What's going on there? And they're like, oh, they're in this huge feud, but you got to watch it Dark. And like, oh, maybe I'll watch Dark because it seems like stuff that's happening on Dark is actually impacting what I'm watching now. And maybe if I like what I'm watching now, I'll check out that other show because it seems to be connected to it. And I think that's really important when it comes to establishing like a hierarchy and just establishing a depth of talent where there's so much happening that you have to watch these like bonus extra shows to if you want to get the full picture.
Yeah, definitely a dark elevation.
Mm-hmm.
And the two, like basically like you combine them both, like a year and a half of their existence. They haven't really reached the main event or superstars level for that they reached in WWE, where main event isn't really required viewing. No one really watches main events. The only time there's news for main events is when like an NXT call-up loses for whatever inexplicable reason, like Aaliyah beats Dakota Kai on main event for whatever reason. But yeah, for Dark and Dark Elevation, those are important. They are treated as important matches. That's where talent could get their reps in and really face off against younger talents. And that's also where scouting happens as well, where people like Daniel Garcia can become an important player to eventually go be on television for Dynamite or Rampage, and even some of the smaller talents as well, even the indie talents like Sky Blue. She blew up recently over the weekend because of that Chicago crowd, and just found herself into the Casino Battle Royal. That's where all these little things happen that end up being big things in the future.
Yeah, and that's a key element when it comes to Dark, and like you said, comparing it to main event or super 205 Live or whatever. Like, right. When are you watching WWE and they mention something on main event? Like if you're watching Raw or SmackDown or pay-per-view, and they mention like, oh, they've had this feud on main event. Like, that never happens. It's just like this irrelevant show to fill some content hours, as opposed to Dark, where like if you're watching the show, like they'll mention this happened on Dark. They'll show the results for Dark on the bottom of the screen. They'll show like they because they use statistics, it helps for people that have picked up a lot of wins on Dark. Because I'll use an example, like when Red Velvet was challenging Britt Baker, you'd kind of be like, what's Red Velvet done to challenge Britt Baker? And then when they show her and they say like, oh, she's won 9 of her last 10 matches, you'd be like, she won those matches on Dark. But then you say like, oh, okay, so she's won a lot of her matches, that's how she got a title shot. That's very logical and makes sense. And it's just kind of how the company uses Dark as, they promote it as something that you should be watching, as opposed to something that you don't have to watch ever, and it should have no interest to you because it's not connected to the big show.
Yeah, I mean the records for people who wrestle on dark is just low key hilarious. A visual where a talent is like oh they're 12-20 or like they're
Yeah.
like 23-5. It's like oh my god how are they having
Well, it's
this
like
many matches in like
Colton
a
Gunn
month?
is on like a Goldberg-esque run here.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Gun Club. There were back when Austin and Colton were tagging consistently. They had like an undefeated record, and like they never made the
Col-
rank. They never made the rankings. I was like so surprised by that.
Colton is on like I think Colton still is undefeated. I think he's like 40-0. They
Yeah,
had that
he's been tagging his dad, Billy, for a long time
they
too.
had the match on Dynamite a few weeks ago with QT Marshall and his crew against the Gun Club, and
Yep.
I was like, okay, this all looks like Colton's streak's gonna end because they're wrestling somebody who's like they're pushing for a pay-per-view match, and then they did it like the distraction finish, and Colton Gunn got the win, and I was like, oh my god, Colton Gunn, he just keeps picking up wins. Like, I honestly want to see it keep happening in the background, and then like him to come out one night on Dynamite for like a singles match, and then just like the thing to pump up is like he's 120-0. Like I was like, my God, this guy, why isn't he like challenged for the world title yet? He's never lost a match in his life. Uh, all right, so we're getting off topic here, but I think we're gonna wrap it up right here. Again, appreciate everyone who's been listening and watching, and all of our subscribers. We appreciate the support. We'll be back again in a few weeks, and we will see you later.